Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost, and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. A wider war is looming in West Asia, Israel versus Hezbollah. Israeli airstrikes have killed more than 500 people in Lebanon. The world is now bracing for a retaliation. Meanwhile, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met the presidents of Palestine and Ukraine in the US. What do these meetings signify? Is Prime Minister Modi looking to play a more important role in resolving these conflicts? We'll discuss that. In China, the government has unveiled a stimulus package to revive the economy. In India, it was a mixed day for the stock market. Great for investors, but not so much for traders. In Bangladesh, the Foreign Ministry has summoned an Indian diplomat. We'll tell you why. In Myanmar, the rebels get an unprecedented invite from New Delhi. In the Pacific, there's a showdown in the skies. Japanese jets fire flares at a Russian airplane. In the UK, Keir Starmer is already less popular than Rishi Sunak. Albania wants to build a new religious microstate. In India, 80% of organ donors are women, but 80% of the recipients are men. Why are these numbers so skewed? And why is the world's largest beer festival selling non-alcoholic beer? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Singapore's former Transport Minister Iswaran convicted in a rare graft trial. This is Singapore's first political graft trial in nearly half a century. The former minister pleaded guilty to accepting illegal gifts and obstructing justice. He is expected to be sentenced in the first week of October. Heavy rain and flash floods wreak havoc in the UK. Roads and houses flooded in central and southern England. Some areas receive a month's worth of rainfall in just 24 hours. A soccer pitch collapses in London. The rains have caused widespread travel disruption as well. Iran's president will hold talks with Vladimir Putin during a visit to Russia next month. He will be going there to attend the BRICS summit. This will be the Iranian leader's first visit to Russia since he took office in the month of July. Both countries have been hit by sweeping sanctions by the West. The Pope offers refuge to Myanmar's former leader Aung San Suu Kyi, who is currently serving a 27-year prison sentence. Suu Kyi was arrested by the military when it staged a coup in 2021. The Pope's offer comes just weeks after he wrapped up his Asia-Pacific tour. And China to probe Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger's parent company PVH. Beijing accuses the firm of discriminatory practices related to Xinjiang, claims the American company is boycotting cotton and other products from there. This is the latest flashpoint in the trade tensions between China and the US.
The IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way.
I've been briefed on the latest developments in Israel and Lebanon.
There's more escalation in West Asia. Israel and Hezbollah are exchanging fire. We are talking hundreds of rockets, dozens of missiles, and hundreds of casualties. It's the most dangerous flare-up in nearly 20 years. Israel is doing most of the damage. They're pounding Lebanon with missiles and rockets. Some 1,600 Hezbollah sites have been hit. And casualties? 558 deaths so far. That includes 50 children and 94 women. Among the rest, it's not clear how many were Hezbollah fighters, so chances are Israel killed a lot of civilians. It's the highest death toll since Lebanon's civil war.
هاي تحت البيت عنا، هاي تحت البيت عنا يا جماعة.
هاي هلا
And it's not over yet. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has released a statement. He's asking Lebanese people to get out of harm's way. The plan is to keep striking Hezbollah targets, to take out their launch sites.
To defend our people against Hezbollah strikes, we must take out those weapons. Now, starting this morning, the IDF has warned you to get out of harm's way. I urge you, take this warning seriously. Don't let Hezbollah endanger your lives and the lives of your loved ones. Don't let Hezbollah endanger Lebanon. Please, get out of harm's way now.
Netanyahu says, get out of harm's way. And go where? Hezbollah is embedded into Lebanese society. They're literally everywhere, in cities, in villages, in remote hills, everywhere. So where does Netanyahu want these people to go? He says the plan is to deter Hezbollah, to remain ahead of the threat. But frankly, Netanyahu is the bigger threat at the moment. He is single-handedly plunging the region into a wider war because Hezbollah is not sitting around. They're striking back. They have fired around 200 rockets at Israel. Most of them were intercepted by the Iron Dome system. And casualties? Just 2 injured in Israel. Hezbollah is the rogue group here, but they have shown surprising restraint. In fact, there is little appetite for war in Lebanon. Then why is Netanyahu poking them? Well, maybe for politics. These attacks have increased his popularity. After the Hamas attack last year, most Israelis wanted Netanyahu out, but now his Likud party is leading national polls. The longer the fighting continues, the stronger he becomes. And what is the world doing about it? Israel's allies have called for restraint. So have China and the United Nations. But none of them seem to have an effect on Netanyahu, not even the United States of America.
The conflict along the blue line has gone on for way too long, far too long, and it needs to get to a resolution quickly. And so we're going to continue to do that, continue to have those diplomatic conversations.
China opposes any violation of Lebanon's sovereignty and security and opposes and condemns any action that harms innocent civilians.
The message to the parties that are firing at each other across the blue line, to all the parties involved in this conflict, is step back from the brink. Stop the escalation.
The UN General Assembly has convened in the backdrop of these tensions, not just in West Asia, but also Ukraine. So war is the talk of the town. Prime Minister Modi was also in New York yesterday, and he met 2 key players of these wars. First was Mahmoud Abbas, the seemingly forever president of Palestine, and then Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. Both were significant meetings. Yes, Putin and Netanyahu are not attending the United Nations, so it's impossible to meet them in New York. Yet, it sends a political message, these meetings, they send a political message. Modi met Abbas amid the escalation in West Asia. He called for a ceasefire in Gaza. He also reiterated India's demand for a 2-state solution. Same with Zelensky. This was Modi's 3rd meeting with him in the last 4 months. He called for a peaceful resolution of the war. Now remember, both Israel and Russia are key partners of India, 2 of the biggest arms suppliers as well. Yet Prime Minister Modi met their chief rivals. What does that tell you? A, the continued death and destruction has made India recalibrate its policy. As an aspiring world leader, you cannot remain silent. And B, India is keeping its options open. And a big reason for that is China. Beijing has deepened its cooperation with Moscow. They're also lobbying for their peace plan. It's a broad and vague proposal, but Putin has agreed to support it, China's proposal. So since Russia is cozying up to China, India is engaging the other side, sort of like covering all bases. It's the same thinking in Gaza. China has become a leading critic of Israel's actions. As a result, they have garnered goodwill in West Asia, whether it's in Iran or Saudi Arabia or the UAE. China even managed to strike a truce between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, something that was considered impossible. So India had to act. New Delhi has not taken sides in these wars. But global perception is different. And you can thank Western media for that. They made it seem like India was tacitly backing Russia and Israel. But with these meetings, Prime Minister Modi has made one thing clear: India is not supporting anyone's war, nor should anyone take India for granted, even if it's a long-time partner or friend. Now let's talk about China. Beijing is finally taking steps to fix its economy. Today it made a series of big announcements, all aimed at one goal: getting growth back on track. Economists say China has unleashed a quote-unquote stimulus blitz. The country's central bank is leading the charge here. It is pumping more money into the economy. Loans are being made cheaper. One big area of focus is mortgage, the EMIs that homeowners pay on their home loans. Interest rates on these loans are being slashed.
The minimum down payment for mortgages for first and second homes will be unified, making the down payment for second home loans at the national level even lower than the current 25%, downgraded to 15%.
So lower down payments and a cut in interest rates for existing loans. Basically, China wants to make home ownership more appealing, more affordable. These steps are aimed at the property sector. It used to be a major driver of growth for the country. It accounts for 20 to 25% of China's GDP, the property sector. But right now, it is like a jammed gun, one that refuses to fire. And Beijing is trying to fix that by cutting interest rates and making home loans cheaper. It is also trying to reboot the stock market. Two big announcements on that front were made today. First, Beijing is setting up a new fund. It will provide funding to brokers, funds and insurance companies. What for? To buy stocks and to make bets in the market. Around $71 billion will be set aside for this fund, $71 billion. There was one more announcement. China is incentivizing share buybacks. What does that mean? What's a share buyback? It is when a publicly listed company buys its own shares from the stock market. You're buying them back. Share buyback can be an effective tool. It can help in raising stock prices. It can boost market activity because when a company buys back its own shares, it reduces the number of shares in circulation in the market. There are fewer shares available for that company in the open market then. And this makes the stock more valuable. Beijing wants to encourage these buybacks, and for that, it will give out cheaper loans to companies so they can get these loans from commercial banks and use that money for share buybacks. Around $40 billion will be made available for this. Of course, investors have welcomed these announcements. Chinese markets saw a big jump. Mainland China stocks saw their biggest spike in 4 years today. So finally, there is some relief for investors. In fact, experts have been pushing Beijing for months. They've been raising demands for a stimulus package, but China kept ignoring these calls. Today, though, it seems to have finally given in. The question is this going to be enough? Or is this intervention too little, too late? You see, Chinese policymakers were forced to make these announcements today. They had no other choice, really. This year's growth target was slipping away. China's economy was slowing down at a much faster pace than expected, and the numbers were not looking good. Output from China's factories had slowed. Sales in retail stores were sluggish. Youth unemployment remained high. The latest numbers came out in the month of July this year. 17% of China's urban youth is without a job. 17%. Economists saw this data as well, and they arrived at one conclusion. They said China will grow at less than 5% this year, and that is below their growth target. They were aiming for 5% growth, but now experts say that there will be a lower growth rate, less than 5%, somewhere around 4%. That's their estimate. So now China is trying to reverse this decline, and that is why it announced the stimulus today. It may not be enough, though, because this economy faces external risks too. Around the world, growth remains sluggish. The demand for Chinese products is falling. In April this year, China's exports shrank by over 7%. And to make matters worse, Western nations are putting trade barriers on Chinese products. From electric cars to steel, the West is looking to curb all kinds of Chinese imports. And this is also a problem for Beijing because exports make up almost 20% of China's GDP. It's a major growth driver again. It's what made China an economic powerhouse, the exports. If exports do not recover, this stimulus is not going to be enough. Yes, it may bring some relief in the short term, but in the long term, China will keep experiencing more economic pain. So that's the current state of the Chinese economy. Its recovery is still a long shot. India, on the other hand, is a sharp contrast. It is the world's fastest growing major economy, and the bull run in the Indian market seems unstoppable. Indian stocks are witnessing a record rally. Both the Sensex and the Nifty have touched new highs, and this rally may not end anytime soon. Foreign investors are buying into Indian companies. They're making bets worth billions of dollars. Now, this could be an outcome of a decision made by the American Central Bank last week. We're talking about the US Federal Reserve, better known as the US Fed. The Fed slashed interest rates. And this was their first rate cut since 2020, the first in 4 years. And what happens when a rate cut is announced? When a central bank cuts interest rates, it increases the flow of money into the economy, so loans become cheaper. And that makes investing in debt less attractive. Think of the loans taken out by governments or the borrowing by the private sector. They issue bonds to raise money. When interest rates are high, investors make more money by buying these bonds because the interest rate is high. But when the rates fall, it makes bonds less appealing. The return on investment from these bonds drops, and no investor likes that. So they start moving their money. Some turn to the stock market. They invest in stocks for better returns. This could explain the influx of foreign money into the Indian markets. Foreign investors have more cash in hand. The bonds are looking less attractive, so they're buying shares of Indian companies. And it makes sense. Indian markets continue to make gains. They're delivering better returns than their global peers. Take the Nifty, for example. This is an index of India's top 50 companies. Nifty's one-year returns stand at 25%. Which means if you put 100 rupees into the Nifty, your investment will grow to 125 rupees. That's a profit of 25 rupees. Now compare this to the American markets like the S&P 500. It's the index of America's top 500 companies. And what's the one-year return of S&P 500? 22%. So 25% versus 22%. Clearly, Indian markets are giving superior returns. And that is why the world is turning to Indian stocks. But that's just one side of the story. Not everyone is making money in this market. A large segment of investors is losing millions, if not billions of rupees. We're talking about the retail investors in India. Those who invest in complex instruments like futures and options. They're called derivatives. India's market regulator has done a study about these derivatives. The regulator is SEBI, the Securities and Exchange Board of India. It's the market watchdog. It looked into investments made by 11 million retail traders. These are individual traders, people like you and me, those who invest directly in the stock market. 11 million. These traders bought derivatives and suffered big losses. In the last 3 years, they have lost over 1.8 lakh crore rupees. That's over $20 billion in losses in the last 3 years, $20 billion. There are more staggering findings from this study. Most traders suffer a loss in these trades. 93 out of 100 retail traders made a loss. 93 out of 100. On average, each lost more than 1 lakh rupees. That's more than $1,000. And what is the profile of these traders? Who are these people? 76% of them earn less than 5 lakh rupees in a year. That's over $5,000. Nearly half of them are below 30 years of age, and more than 70% of them come from small towns of India. What does this data tell you? Young investors with limited incomes and small savings are betting in the market and they're suffering heavy losses. Any expert would tell you that these are not sound investments. Trading in derivatives is different from buying stock. These investments have a high risk. When you buy a stock, you're purchasing shares at its current market price. The number you can see on your trading screen. Derivative trading is like making a prediction. You predict the future value of a share and then you make a bet. Clearly, most of these investors are making the wrong bets. And this is not investment, really. This is gambling. More and more Indians are falling prey to this. They're attracted to the markets by the current rally, but they end up suffering losses. SEBI is now trying to protect these investors. It plans to introduce strict rules for trading in the derivatives market. And we say it is the need of the hour. When Sheikh Hasina was ousted, one thing was clear. India would have it tough in Dhaka. Just how tough, though? We're realizing it now. There's a new flashpoint between India and Bangladesh, and at the center of it is India's Home Minister Amit Shah. Last week, he was campaigning in the state of Jharkhand. Elections are expected there in November this year, so Amit Shah was holding a rally. Listen to what he said.
मुझे बताओ, ये भूमि हमारे आदिवासियों की है या रोहिंग्या बांग्लादेशी घुसपैठियों की है? जोर से बोलो। मैं आज कहकर जाता हूं, आप यहां कमल फूल की सरकार बनाओ, एक घुसपैठियों को हम उल्टा लटका कर सीधा करने का काम हम करेंगे.
He said the BJP will hang Bangladeshi infiltrators upside down. Naturally, Dhaka is not happy about this. They summoned India's Deputy High Commissioner in Bangladesh. They also handed over a protest note. Listen to what it says. I'm quoting. The ministry conveyed its serious reservation, deep sense of hurt and extreme displeasure, and called upon the government of India to advise the political leaders to refrain from making such objectionable and unacceptable remarks. Now, just to be clear, this has happened before. In 2018, Amit Shah called Bangladeshi migrants termites. Sheikh Hasina was in power then. Her ministers did criticize these comments, but no official protest was lodged. In 2019, there was a repeat. Amit Shah called Bangladeshi citizens infiltrators. That too ahead of Hasina's visit to New Delhi. But again, no official protest. So what has changed this time? The regime in Dhaka, that's what has changed. Sheikh Hasina and New Delhi had a comfortable equation. They knew where to draw the line. They knew how to respect each other and how to handle things privately. Basically, to not make a spectacle out of differences. But Mohammad Yunus thinks differently. He's keen on public clashes. We saw that with the recent floods. His ministers openly blamed India without any evidence. Also at the border, Dhaka accused India of trying to illegally build a fence. India later said it was a cattle fence, nothing devious or shady. And now you have this official diplomatic protest. It's clearly a change in Dhaka's approach. The question is, how long will it last? Well, Yunus is not going anywhere. Bangladesh's army chief has promised to back him, and I'm quoting, come what may. That's what the army chief has said. He says Yunus will implement key reforms. What about elections? The army thinks elections could be held within 18 months. And a lot could change in that time. The Jamaat-e-Islami could regroup. Yunus could float his own party. But whatever happens, one thing looks clear. The anti-India sentiment is unlikely to go away. Yunus is actually in the United States right now. He's scheduled to address the United Nations General Assembly. But more important are his bilateral meetings. Yunus met US President Joe Biden today. It was the first US-Bangladesh bilateral in many years. And for Biden, it's a policy change. He kept Sheikh Hasina at an arm's length. He even sanctioned some Bangladeshi officials. But with Mohammad Yunus, he wants a reset. This will surely ignite more speculation about Yunus in Washington. Many already see him as America's guy in Dhaka. But even otherwise, there's a lot at stake. The US is Bangladesh's top export destination. Yunus also needs the US to help secure some funding from the IMF. Hence this outreach. And Mohammad Yunus is also meeting China's foreign minister in New York, plus the leaders of Italy and Kuwait. But guess who he did not meet? Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Dhaka says Yunus had reached New York late, so the meeting could not happen. But Foreign Minister Jaishankar did meet Dhaka's caretaker foreign minister. Later he posted this short message on X. No mention of issues, no promises to expand cooperation. Jaishankar simply said, conversation focused on bilateral ties. Maybe it's vague by design. The fact is, both sides need to make an effort here. India is making an effort, but Bangladesh is not. A new security crisis has erupted there in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. Now, this is a sensitive area bordering India's northeast. It used to be dominated by Buddhist and Hindu communities. But in the 1980s, Dhaka began settling Bengalis there, and since then, it's been pretty tense. Last week, a Bengali man was lynched in this region. In response, there were attacks on the indigenous minorities, especially the Buddhists. Some of them have asked Prime Minister Modi to intervene, to ensure their safety. And this sums up the problem here. Dhaka is indifferent to India's concerns and interests. Prime Minister Modi has been asking Yunus to protect minorities, but Yunus says the attacks are exaggerated. This is not how you build a relationship. You must engage in good faith. You must be willing to put the past behind. But is Mohammed Yunus ready to do that? Or has he given in to anti-India politics? The answers so far are pretty clear. And staying with the region, let's look at another Indian neighbor, Myanmar. The country is in the middle of a civil war right now. The ruling junta is on one side, an ethnic rebel alliance is on the other side. Now, India has always demanded a return to democracy, but it's never condemned the junta, not like Western countries have, which is why a new development has raised questions. Look at this report. It says rebel groups have been invited to a seminar in New Delhi. It's being organized by the ICWA, that's the Indian Council of World Affairs. It's a government-funded council. Even Foreign Minister Jaishankar is part of it. And who got the invite? The National Unity Government, which is a parallel regime, the Chin National Front, the Arakan Army, and the Kachin Independence Army. These are armed ethnic militias. They are fighting to topple the military regime. Their goals remain a bit unclear, but the broad agreement is to re-establish democracy in Myanmar. So if India invites these groups, it's a big move. It would mean that New Delhi is keeping its options open. But frankly, it's not a surprise. Minister Jaishankar had met the junta's foreign minister in July. Look at his statement afterwards. And I'm quoting, India supports the return of democracy in Myanmar and engages all stakeholders in that regard. Let me underline, all stakeholders. And why not? The junta is not as strong as it used to be. The rebels now control around 50% of the country. At first, the fighting was limited to border regions, but now they're targeting the heartland. Military bases have been attacked. Even the junta chief's house was targeted. These rebels also have powerful supporters. Reports say Western volunteers have joined their fight. We're talking about ex-soldiers from the US and Britain. They're training and fighting with the rebels. Officially, their governments may criticize it, but surely they are in the know. Reports also say that the rebels are armed and funded by the West. What about the other side? Well, the junta is mainly backed by Russia and China, but China is also playing both sides. They support the rebels and the junta. In this backdrop, you can see what India is trying to do. Almost everyone is meddling in Myanmar. So you must be prepared for anything. You can't operate in darkness. Plus, India has a lot at stake here. We share a 1,600 kilometer long border with Myanmar. Many communities on both sides share familial ties. Some armed groups also operate near the border. They cross over, they launch attacks, and then cross back. It's a big headache for India. That is why the government is planning to fence the border to increase security. New Delhi also has important investments in Myanmar, like the $400 million Kaladan port and a $250 million road project. These initiatives require local support. The junta sitting in the capital cannot offer that. You must engage the local ethnic armies. And all of this makes one thing quite clear. It is in India's interest to engage with the rebels. The only question is, what is the end goal? Is it only about protecting investments? Is it about bringing back democracy? Is it about sending a message to the junta? Or is it about keeping the likes of China and the West in check? Possibly it's a mix of all of these. The last few years have certainly made Indian diplomacy more flexible. No one is off limits anymore. Not the Taliban in Afghanistan, not the Islamists in Dhaka, the Marxists in Sri Lanka, and not the rebels in Myanmar. It's a policy rooted in ground realities and pragmatism. In the Pacific, another conflict is building up. A Russian airplane violated Japan's airspace. It was a first since 2019. Tokyo issued multiple warnings. The Russian plane paid no heed. So Japan did the unprecedented. It fired warning flares at the military plane from Russia. This is the first time Japan's Air Force has fired flares since 1958. The first since 1958. So this was an extreme step for them. But it also shows you that Tokyo has had enough. In the last 1 year, Japan has scrambled jets 669 times. In the last 1 month, there have been repeated drills and incursions by Chinese and Russian militaries, all of which has left Japan alarmed. So why are Moscow and Beijing testing Tokyo's limits? Our next report tells you.
It was around 1 p.m. local time. A Russian Il-38 patrol plane entered the Japanese airspace above Raebun Islands. Tokyo immediately scrambled its jets. It warned the Russian plane. The plane ignored Japan's warnings. It violated Japan's airspace 3 times. On the 3rd time, Japan used flares, a first since 1958. Tokyo has since defended its action, calling it a legitimate response. The defense minister says Japan issued warnings to the Russian plane, but it didn't respond. It was only after multiple warnings that Tokyo used flares. Japan has lodged an extremely stern protest with Moscow.
The airspace violation is extremely regrettable, and today, we strongly protested to the Russian government through diplomatic channels and urged them to prevent recurrence of such an incident.
Russia is yet to respond. This is the first incursion by a Russian aircraft since 2019. Earlier this month, a Russian aircraft did fly around the area. Back then as well, Japan scrambled its jets. But the Tu-142 plane did not enter Japanese airspace. Instead, it flew over these islands. Japan calls them the Northern Territories. Russia calls them the Kurils. These are a string of volcanic islands, and they're disputed. Soviet troops invaded them in the final days of World War II. Moscow considers them a part of its territory. Tokyo says it's illegally occupied by Russia. The islands are at the heart of a long feud between the two countries ever since the end of World War II. In fact, it prevented them from signing a World War II peace treaty formally. But this incursion isn't just about these islands, it has to do with another neighbor, China. Recently, Russia and China held joint drills in the Sea of Japan. It was the largest of its kind in 3 decades. Just a day ahead of the incursion, Chinese and Russian warships sailed around the Japanese northern coast. Japan says it has scrambled its jets 669 times between April 2023 and March 2024. 70% was against Chinese military aircraft, but it did not include incursions, and there have been a few of them. In August, a Chinese military aircraft entered Japan's airspace. Tokyo called it a serious violation of its sovereignty. And now there's another incursion, this time by Russia. The timing is significant. On Saturday, the Quad met in Delaware. The statement didn't mention China by name, but the US president was caught in a hot mic moment. He said Beijing was testing the group in the region. Then on Monday, Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met Ukrainian President Zelensky. Japan has long supported Kyiv in the war. This meeting was to further extend cooperation. So the sheer increase in the number of incursions and drills isn't just a coincidence. It's a message to Japan. Both Moscow and Beijing may have different reasons, but their goal is similar, to deter Tokyo in the region. But their actions could have the opposite effect. For decades, Japan has been a pacifist nation. It's enshrined in their constitution. But Tokyo seems to be leaving that behind. The government is on its biggest military spending spree in decades. Tokyo wants to expand its armed forces. And these incursions are likely to push Japan further in that direction.
Now let's turn our attention to the UK. The country got a new government in July. Britain's Labour Party returned to power after 14 long years. They were propelled to power thanks to their predecessors, the UK Conservative Party, also known as the Tories. The Tories gave Britain 5 prime ministers in 14 years. They brought about Brexit and effectively tanked the British economy under the country's shortest-serving Prime Minister, Liz Truss. You would remember this. Truss was Prime Minister for 49 days. Her shelf life was famously shorter than that of a lettuce. But now, after a few months of Labour rule, Truss is looking quite fresh. She has crawled out of the woodwork and says that things in Britain would have been better had she been in charge. Can you imagine? The Prime Minister who crushed the economy, who brought the pound to an all-time low, thinks that she would be doing a better job than the people in charge right now. That is the state of British politics and the dismay surrounding the new Labour government. It starts at the top with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Starmer was not really a charismatic leader to start with, but he won the last election thanks to his opponents. Their mistakes propelled him to power because the British people were fed up with the Tories. But winning the election was just the opening act. The real job is actually governing. And in just about 80 days in charge, Keir Starmer has already disappointed and angered the public. Look at this opinion poll. It says Starmer is already less popular than his predecessor, Rishi Sunak. Sunak has a minus 25% approval rating. Not making this up. Minus 25% for Rishi Sunak. Most British people think he's terrible. But Keir Starmer's rating is minus 26, a point worse off than even Sunak. How did this happen? Just 80 odd days after Starmer trounced Sunak in the election. Well, 2 major factors are to blame. The first is a ridiculous scandal involving clothing donations. Keir Starmer was given clothing worth £16,200. His wife was also given about £5,000 worth of clothing. That's over $28,000 worth of clothes for the Starmers. You have to wonder, where do you draw the line between political donations and lavish, luxurious gifts? And remember, the Labour Party had promised to be responsible, that they wouldn't have parties and get into scandals like the Tories. So after all that preaching, the clothing donations were in poor taste. Keir Starmer is being pulled up for accepting the clothes and then failing to disclose them. Not exactly a good look. And it wasn't just Starmer. His Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, and his Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, did this too. They both took thousands of pounds worth of free clothing from donors, and this has led to outrage in Britain. It has dampened the sentiment around the annual Labour Party conference. The conference is taking place in Liverpool. It was supposed to be a celebration, but this is how it started.
Welcome back to Liverpool. Welcome to conference, our biggest conference ever, and the first one in 15 years with Labour in government. And change has started. And today we're going to set out, and over the next coming days, how we're fixing the foundations and rebuilding our country. So enjoy conference. Very, very good to be here.
Should you have taken those freebies, Prime Minister?
So much for the celebrations. Over the last few days, the Labour Party has been trying to limit the damage. Keir Starmer has promised to stop accepting clothing donations. And the rest of the party has been trying to get the focus back on their message. But that is also a problem, because their message is also unpopular. Starmer wants to fix things, but he says things will get worse before they get better. He says rebuilding Britain will mean making tough choices, and one of those choices is apparently letting pensioners freeze. The UK has been suffering from a cost of living crisis for years, but there was some small relief for pensioners. They would be given a winter fuel payment by the government, a small allowance to spend on extra heating costs in the winter. But now the Labour government has decided to restrict this allowance. It will only go to pensioners who can prove that they need the money. The move is expected to save the government about £1.4 billion annually by stopping payments to about 10 million pensioners. The plan has led to an outcry, and it's one of the reasons for Starmer's dwindling popularity. This, together with the clothing donation scandal, has tanked his ratings, leaving him more unpopular than Rishi Sunak and the Tories. The Labour Party's honeymoon period is already over. They will need to win public confidence back, because sooner or later, public anger will make itself felt, as Sunak, Truss and all the others know all too well. Now let's look at Albania. It's a country in southeastern Europe, in the region known as the Balkans. Albania is home to less than 3 million people of various religions and faiths. The country is often cited as a good example of religious tolerance. But now their Prime Minister wants to go a step further. He has proposed the creation of a new country within Albania's capital, Tirana. He's proposed a religious microstate, like the Vatican City in Rome. The one in Albania is to be the sovereign territory of an Islamic Sufi sect known as the Bektashi Order. Our next report has the details.
A soaring rate of crime, a male-to-female ratio of about 6:1, and the highest per capita wine consumption in the world. We aren't talking about some pirate haven here. These are some figures from the world's smallest country, Vatican City. Vatican City is a microstate, located entirely within Rome. The absurd stats you heard are a byproduct of this unique situation. The Vatican is a religious microstate, populated almost entirely by male members of the Catholic clergy. The Vatican is also a tourist and therefore pickpocketing hotspot. This has given rise to all those strange figures. Now, Albania is planning to come up with its own microstate, one that'll be even smaller, about a quarter of the size of the Vatican, and entirely located within Albania's capital, Tirana. It'll be called the Sovereign State of the Bektashi Order. This plan was announced by Albania's Prime Minister, Edi Rama, at the ongoing United Nations General Assembly session in New York. And yesterday he put up this post on social media, extolling the virtues of the Bektashi Order. It's an Islamic Sufi mystic sect which originated in the 13th century. It was founded in what is today Turkey. The sect is known for its tolerance, mysticism and devotion to dervishes. The order grew in prominence over the years and expanded to the outer reaches of the Ottoman Empire, the Balkans, especially modern-day Albania, Kosovo and North Macedonia. The order was headquartered in Turkey until 1925, when it was expelled by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. After that, its headquarters shifted to Tirana in Albania, where it has been based since. The order's current head is Edmund Brahimaj, better known as Baba Mundi. He hopes to lead the new Vatican-style microstate, and says it'll allow alcohol, let women wear what they want, and impose no lifestyle rules. The Albanian Prime Minister, Edi Rama, says that the Bektashi state will be a new center of moderation, tolerance, and peaceful coexistence. The new microstate won't come up immediately. It'll take Albania time to work out the details, but some things have been proposed. The territorial limit has been fixed as the order's current domain, approximately 10 hectares of land. The new state will grant citizenship only to religious leaders and administrators, operating like the Vatican does. Other details are still being worked out, but the plan is already facing pushback. Leaders of the Muslim community in Albania say they weren't consulted. Muslims make up about half of Albania's population. The Bektashis make up about 5%. So the move is being seen as positive discrimination for a minority community. But the community itself is divided. There are still Bektashis living in Turkey, and they have rejected the idea of a Bektashi state in Albania. Then there's the political criticism about how Prime Minister Rama sprung the news at an international forum before announcing the plan in Albania. His critics say it's a gimmick to get good international press and ignore domestic issues. So there are a number of issues with the proposal, and it won't amount to much if the new state isn't recognized, which means it's far from certain that the new microstate will actually come into existence. So the Vatican can rest easy, because its reputation as the world's smallest country is safe, for now.
For our next story, let me tell you about Archana Kamath, a 33-year-old lecturer and the mother of a 4-year-old child living in India's Karnataka. Earlier this month, Kamath underwent surgery, a liver donation surgery. She was donating the organ to a relative. According to social media, the recipient was a sister of Kamat's mother-in-law. She is 63 years old. Her liver was 60% damaged. And apparently she'd been searching for a donor for 1.5 years. So Kamat volunteered to help. She offered to donate a part of her liver. The procedure itself went smoothly, but later Kamat developed some complications and she died last Sunday. While the reasons why Kamat donated a part of her organ to a distant relative are hard to verify, one thing is clear: she made the ultimate sacrifice. She gave a part of herself to help someone else. But tonight our story is not just about Kamat, it's about women everywhere who give and keep giving but rarely receive. We'll explain, but first the basics. What is organ transplantation? It's a medical procedure where an organ is removed from one body and placed in another. The donation can be made in two ways. The first is a deceased donation, where organs are given at the time of the donor's death, immediately after death. The second is living organ donation, where a living person can donate their organs. Now, this process of transplantation comes with risks, physical risks, of course. There is about 17% risk of physical complications like infections, bleeding, and clots. Plus, the surgery can have a lasting effect on the donor. In some cases, it can even lead to death. But in almost all cases, donating an organ comes with emotional concerns. Donors experience grief, guilt, disappointment, distress, and anxiety. Many have to live with a lower quality of life, and this does not come as a surprise. Giving someone a part of yourself is indeed a great deed, but it can also be a burden. And you know who shoulders most of this burden? Women. Let's stay with India. Between 1995 and 2021, 80% of the living donors were women. 80% of the donors were women. Most of them were wives and mothers, basically married women. Meanwhile, do you know how many women were organ recipients? Only about 20%. Let me repeat that. 80% of the donors are women, but 80% of the recipients are men. This after women face more health security than men. It's a glaring gender disparity. And like most things sexist, it is rarely limited by borders. Let's look at global data. Every year, about 2/3 of all organ donations are kidney transplants. And 60% of all kidney donors are women the world over, while 65% of the recipients are men. And this is not just about kidneys. The disparity applies to most organ transplants: livers, hearts, lungs, even pancreas. Men are the priority. The question is why? I'll answer this with an example. Let's look at the Philippines. This Asian country is an outlier. They follow a matriarchal system where women have a higher social status. Do you know the result? They have the lowest proportion of female donors in the continent, 50%. So coming back to the question, why do more women donate their organs the world over? Because of the social order. Women have a low social status. They are conditioned to be caregivers, nurturers. They have an assumed duty to sacrifice for the family. The extent of that sacrifice apparently is limitless. Have you heard of Oktoberfest? It's the world's biggest beer festival. It started in Munich in 1810 and it's still going. But this year, the festival has a new addition to the menu: non-alcoholic beer. Sounds a little absurd, right? Why would the world's biggest beer festival sell non-alcoholic beer? Well, it has to do with the rising popularity of non-alcoholic beverages. It used to be a niche, but now it's a rapidly growing market. A lot of this has to do with the changing social norms around drinking. Our next report tells you why non-alcoholic beverages are the new cool thing.
It's cold, it's foaming, it's poured straight from the pump. But it won't leave you with a hangover tomorrow. So what is this miracle drink? Well, it's beer, but the non-alcoholic kind. And this year it's on the menu at the Oktoberfest, the world's biggest beer festival.
For people who don't like to drink alcohol and want to enjoy the Oktoberfest as well, I think it's a good option. But sometimes people feel like they have more fun with alcohol, which is not a good thing, because you can also have fun without alcohol. So if you like to drink alcohol-free beer, I think that's definitely an option for you.
The German beer industry started making non-alcoholic beverages in the 1990s. But the demand remained stagnant. It was around 2% of the market share. But in the last 3 years, it has seen a surge. It's gone up to 10% now, which means more and more people are drinking them.
I really like non-alcoholic beer because I like more beer, of course, but you can't drink it the whole day if you have to work, if you have to drive, everything else, and you can't drink beer every day, unfortunately.
In 2020, the global non-alcoholic beverages market was worth $923 million. In 2028, it could be worth more than $1.7 trillion. And contributing to this growth is a societal and cultural shift. Social gatherings have long been associated with alcohol. You socialize, you drink, and you spend the rest of the next day recovering. Well, not anymore. More and more people are prioritizing health over temporary indulgence. From reducing calorie intake to avoiding the dreaded hangover, choosing a non-alcoholic drink is rooted in a desire for a healthier lifestyle. Then there's Gen Z. They're not drinking as much. Gen Zers drink 20% less than millennials on an average. Many Gen Zers are abstaining from booze altogether, and it has to do with heightened awareness. Which brings us to the industry. Creating a non-alcoholic beer is a complex process. It's not just about not adding alcohol, it's about maintaining the same flavor profile. And there are more options than ever. It's not just non-alcoholic beer, there's non-alcoholic wine, dry spirits, botanicals, and pre-mixed mocktails.
Brewers know that if you reduce the alcohol or if you have no alcohol in the beer, you have a lack of aroma quality. And we produce or we breed special hop varieties that you can fill this lack of aroma in a beer, that the non-alcoholic beers have a fully taste as good as a alcohol beer.
So the future of drinking is changing. Non-alcoholic beverages are no longer a trend. It's a redefinition of what it means to drink. A drink doesn't need to contain alcohol to be celebratory, and social connection doesn't require a buzz. To drink or not to drink, well, the choice is yours.
Have you heard of Tupperware? It's an American utensil brand. They make durable and reliable kitchen containers. It's a household name in most countries, including here in India. But now Tupperware has filed for bankruptcy. The company just couldn't keep up with the times. They made plastic in Greta Thunberg's world. So the company went broke. Here in India, it's triggered a meme fest. Social media users say Indian moms had a special affection for Tupperware, and the reactions are hilarious. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Protesters hurl firecrackers at a government building in Mexico. An art installation in Qatar's capital, Doha, showcases 15,000 teddy bears, each representing a child killed in Gaza. And a rare diamond necklace from 18th century France heads to auction. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1932, B.R. Ambedkar and Mahatma Gandhi agreed upon the Pune Pact. They had sparred over the allocation of separate electorates for Dalits. Ambedkar was in favor of it, but Gandhi thought it would divide the society. So the two leaders reached an agreement. The Pune Pact scrapped the idea of separate electorates for Dalits, but it increased the number of reserved seats for them. This further shaped India's electoral system in the years to come. We are leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
Kamala, you're fired!
I say, bring it on.
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America.